Hello, my name is Matthew Dulitz and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of The Neuropsychotherapist. Welcome to another weekly report. Unfortunately, last week I couldn't deliver a report. I was down in Sydney doing a coherence therapy workshop. And while I was in Sydney, I had an opportunity to interview Niall Geoghegan, and he is an expert in coherence therapy. And he was the one leading the workshop, and we got a lot of hands-on experiential training, and it was really fantastic. I managed to get Niall aside for a few minutes and ask him a few questions about coherence therapy and his result of that interview.
I'm Niall Geoghegan. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist in Berkeley, California, and I specialize in coherence therapy. It's a model that I've been using for about 12 years. I'm also a trainer through the Coherence Therapy Institute, where I train other practitioners to do coherence therapy by Skype. I work with people in person in my office in Berkeley, and I also work with people by phone and by Skype. I've been in Australia for the last week leading a 4-day coherence therapy workshop. Well, it was actually 2 days of intermediate level and 2 days of beginning level training in coherence therapy. Before I was practicing coherence therapy, I was pretty much specializing in self-psychology, intersubjective work, intersubjectivity work, more analytically trained. And I found self-psychology and intersubjectivity really fascinating, but what frustrated me with it was how long and slow, almost by definition, it seemed the process was so long and slow. It almost seemed to be a mantra among the people who were training me. I was in graduate school still at the time. It almost seemed to be a mantra that the only good therapy, the only effective therapy is very long, slow therapy, because that's how long it takes to really understand a person and to really co-create a sense of a person's sense of self and world of meaning. And I always just chafed against that. I always had this feeling like there must be some quicker way of getting to that level of depth. And at a certain point, I was introduced to the book Depth-Oriented Brief Therapy, written by Bruce Ecker. It was the first book that was written on coherence therapy. At that time, it was called Depth-Oriented Brief Therapy. The name changed several years later. And I just was hooked by the book. I read a case study and saw how this therapist seemed to be using particular types of techniques that were accessing the level of depth that I had previously assumed would take many, many sessions to access, and I just got fascinated by it from there. Started training. It turned out that Bruce Ecker was right nearby in Oakland, California, right nearby. I was able to go and do trainings with him and have been practicing and training coherence therapy ever since. There are a couple of things that differentiate coherence therapy from a lot of other forms of therapy. One is that it actually has the intention to be brief, to really get to the underpinnings of a particular symptom as quickly as possible. Not every kind of therapy even has the intention to be brief. It also holds an assumption, the coherence therapist holds an assumption that those fundamental assumptions, meanings, and knowings about self and the world that are the underpinnings for any particular symptom are immediately accessible. They're not immediately accessible in the way we usually talk with people, though. To immediately access these deep, fundamental meanings and knowings about self and the world, we need to employ other types of techniques, experiential techniques, techniques that are going to access and activate knowings that are held in the emotional brain, as opposed to our regular prefrontal cortex cognitive brain. So what I love about coherence therapy is that every session is a really exciting and imaginative and playful exploration of the client's experience done in this experiential way. So we're not just talking about, we're picturing things, noticing what arises, sometimes involving movement or different ways of accessing all of a client's psyche instead of just the cognitive mind. And by doing that, we are able to make progress on a particular symptom even within the course of just one session. Every session moves us forward very rapidly. So aside from just loving the ideas when I was reading it in the book or starting to learn about coherence therapy, once I started actually putting it into practice, I just watched my clients take off. I started seeing results like I had never, not only had I never seen them before, I had never really imagined those types of results were possible. And I remember that started from the very first time I actually tried to do a coherence therapy session with somebody with whom I had been previously working in a different model, and just saw the change happen. And once I saw that, I was hooked. I just wanted to find out more about how do I keep making these kinds of results happening. And that's pretty consistently been my experience ever since, 12 years later. There are a lot of ways to get more training in coherence therapy. The easiest way to go about it is to go to the main coherence therapy website, which is just coherencetherapy.org. And there's a drop-down tab up at the top that will lead to some training courses. They're fundamentally two different kinds. There are individual practicums, which we do by phone or by Skype, so people can do them from anywhere in the world, where one trainer will talk to one trainee, basically a case consultation, where you're helping the trainee reformulate his or her cases in a coherence therapy way and sharpen the techniques, talking it through. The other kind of training is what's called a dyad practicum, where we will pair two trainees up and have them do sessions, practice sessions with each other in real time, coached by the trainer. And that's a really great way to learn because you just are in it, having the experience of, in real time, having to work out, how do I think in this really fundamentally different way than I'm probably used to? Just a number of things about the thinking and the practice of coherence therapy are a great divergence from what many people are used to. And there's no better way to learn about that than to do sessions with each other.
Well, it was so good to get some practical experience with coherence therapy in a workshop situation with a specialist like Niall. And if you want to know more about coherence therapy and the science behind it, I'll leave a lot of links below this video that you can explore. And there's also a series of videos that Niall has done that you can explore, and gives a very good overview of coherence therapy. Now, as we usually do, we're going to cross down to Sydney, where we have Richard Hill informing us of the latest things that he's been discovering.
Well, hello and welcome from Richard Hill, Mind Science Institute. Yeah, another week. What's interesting? What's happening? Now, I suppose in the what's happening preempted, as I've been reviewing my work on interpersonal neurobiology as I prepare for a series of workshops in Melbourne and Sydney through PDP, which we'll give you the links at the end through the professional development program. And so interpersonal neurobiology is, of course, a really interesting examination and work into the nature of the way the human being and the mental state and the affective situations that we all talk about and work with relate to the nature of our engagement with others, that the growth of self and the growth of mind and brain is all to do not only with the inward development of ourselves, but also the outward engagement with others. So interpersonal neurology is really good. Dan Siegel, of course, one of the leaders, Alan Shaw, Lou Cozzolino, Diana Fosha, Pat Ogden, all these really great, Stephen Porges, all these really great people. But one of the things that I was referring to a little bit more, and I was reminding myself, this wonderful book, The Master and His Emissary, by the wonderful Ian McGilchrist. I was also, reminding myself a little bit with Brainstorm, Dan Siegel's new one, which has a lot of the material that he's had in a lot of the other books and put it nicely in relation to the teenage brain. And I think this right-left thing is really important. Certainly we have the need to integrate front to back, top to bottom, bottom to top, body to brain, also story, memory, our narratives. And these are important aspects that have been brought out in interpersonal neurobiology. But this right-left brain thing is curious. We get sort of goody-baddie type of stuff with this still. The right brain is the goody if you're into all emotional, if you're more female, if you're more caring, more concerned. And the left brain is the goody if you're more male and you're more structured and you're more organized and you're more businesslike. And nothing actually could be further from the truth of who's goodies and baddies. I guess this taps into my the reason for that is the winner-loser-world approach, which I talk about, in the fact that we keep looking for winners and losers. And it's not a matter of that. What it is what are the processes and how can we bring them together? It's integration that we talk about in interpersonal neurobiology. The disintegration that occurs because of culture, and the integration, but also what occurs in culture is the confusion. And so sometimes we have to disintegrate in order to comfortably reintegrate again. So McGilchrist talks nicely about the right side and the left side. And what he's really pointing out is that a lot to do with what we need and what we understand and how we can process the world and how the world is best processed comes from right-sided activity. And let's even put it more simply and talk about, perhaps we're talking about also not so much just right-sided, but non-conscious activity. And conscious activity is so often defined by those things that we can speak, those things that we can reflect on, and consciously reflect on, as in say, so therefore language becomes, and left side becomes very important. But what I think is one of the nicest things to understand about right and left side, and the importance of their dual, integrated, connected activity, cooperative activity, is this right side is to do with the broader picture, the general, the overall. It's not actually about specifics and detail. In fact, the right side quite happily carries a number of possibilities and a number of ambivalent, almost, possibilities as to what something could be. It's looking at things in context. It's looking at things as a part of the lived experience, of the lived self. And so consequently, we talk a lot about feeling felt. We talk a lot about feeling the other person's, living the other person's experience, which is a great reason why I advocate everyone should do 6 months to a year of acting, where they actually learn that it is possible, just through the process of framing the context of our experience into a particular place which the script defines, that you can become not only interesting aspects of the broader self, but quite surprising aspects and presentations of the broader self. The many me's that we create out of the I, depending upon our experience. So the other part that is very important is that the right side sees things in the context of the living experience, and the left side sees it in the context of more the abstract, more the non-living, the inanimate experience. And so it is able to get things organized and move things through and get things specified. But we do need this integration with the right side where we see that in the process. And we see it in the overall setting and the overall engagement. And what we get confused about, I think, in relation to particularly male-female exposure and particularly emotional nature of the right side, is we get confused about our sense of temperament. And that temperament, which is about our sensitivities and our intensity, how sensitive we are to something and how intensely we respond to it. That what we do with this temperament is we confuse that with the sense of if I am sensitive and intense, therefore I am right-sided. Therefore I am emotional, therefore I am female and I am good. Whereas if I'm less sensitive and less intense, therefore I must be more organized and I'm not so human, I'm not so life, so therefore I'm left-sided and I'm masculine and so on and so forth. Whereas actually the temperament can be a wonderful thing. If you are less sensitive and less intense, then that's an enormous benefit to your ability to be resilient and to cope and manage. But on the other hand, if you're more sensitive and more intense, it's enormously interesting in relation to your capacity to notice other things and to engage with other things and to see outside of your own context. But it also is something that forces you more inward and can be terribly detrimental in your sense of traumatic management. So this right side, left side thing is about knowing what they are and then utilizing their engagement as an interpersonal way of understanding where we are in the context of our experience and then expressing it in a way that is functional and capable and effective. So if anybody wants to come along to the workshops, pdpseminars.com.au, come in there, look me up. I've got interpersonal neurobiology. I'm doing some neuroscience again in Melbourne. I've also got later on coming up the mirror hand approach that Ernest Rossi teaches, and as you know, he's my mentor. And also my own work on the mirror neurons in November. Check that out in Sydney. I want to see you coming along and learning about the curiosity approach and how we actually apply that into practice. So for now, I want to thank you for your time. Don't forget, always go back to some of the great books, and if you haven't got back to them, grab them. Brainstorm, really good. PDP seminars, me, all those things. As I always say, be creative, be engaged, be now right and left brain integrated, producing wonderful selves, and bye for now.
Thank you, Richard. And isn't that a marvellous book, The Master and His Emissary? I would just encourage you, if you haven't read McGilchrist's book, that it should be on your reading list. It's a great read. Now, we like to keep up with what's happening on Shrink Wrap Radio. So it's across to California, where we have Dr. Dave letting us know what's happening on his show. Thanks, Dr. Dave.
Hey, Matthew, it's Dr. Dave here once again. Man, oh man, it's really hard to believe that it's time to make another video. It feels like it was just yesterday that I made one, and here another week has rolled by again already. Today is July 3rd, by the way, so tomorrow, of course, is July 4th, our American Independence Day here in the U.S. So, happy 4th of July to you there. I know it doesn't have the same meaning for you. I'm sure you have your own day of celebration there, as do others around the world. Here it will be a family day at Chez Van Nuys with 4 grandchildren and 3 of my 4 kids and spouses and so on. And we have a lovely backyard, a large backyard with a spreading tree that provides lots of shade and a picnic bench underneath that. So it's this is where the celebrations tend to happen. And then people will probably go out and watch fireworks at one of the many venues around here in the evening. But enough of that. I'm here to tell you all about the next podcast, which is going to be number 411. And the kudos go to you, Matthew. You already had very high credibility with me. Your money's good here. But this is a recommendation that you gave me, I think sometime back, of Linda Graham, marriage family therapist Linda Graham. And I'm doing a series on mindfulness, and her book is mainly on resilience, but she really fit in very well. So this week's guest, as of July 10th, the show will go up, and it will be Linda Graham, marriage and family therapist, who, as it turns out, lives and works only maybe 20, 30 miles away from where I live. So it's kind of marvelous, I guess, that I have to get a recommendation all the way from Australia to be aware of her work, because I wasn't aware of it before. But she's written this wonderful book called Bouncing Back, which is a wonderful kind of synonym, I guess, for resilience. It's called Bouncing Back, Rewiring Your Brain for Maximum Resilience and Well-Being. And so it's really a great fit for those who are followers of the neuropsychotherapist, because she brings lots of neuroscience. She does a wonderful integration of neuroscience, psychotherapy, and Buddhism in a wonderful synthesis. And she speaks so fluidly, so fluently about all of this that I was just kind of bowled away. So it's a wonderful interview. I highly recommend it. And I know that you will be glad that you listened to it, all you out there. So that's it here from California. Back to you, Matthew.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Dave. I'm really glad that you managed to get Linda on your show. She's great value, and so is her book, Bouncing Back. I'd just like to encourage our readers that if you haven't read the book, Bouncing Back, that you should have it on your reading list. It is good value, and it's also a great resource that you can recommend to your clients as well. That's all we have time for this week. I hope there's been something in there for you. I'm Matthew Darlitz. Until next time, have a great week. Goodbye.